Thanks very much. It is awesome to be here, and can I just say it feels like a total super party in this hotel. You are dominating the Marriott, and it just feels like Woodstock, or probably closer to my generation, a Fish concert, and also because I'm from Vermont. So congratulations for rocking it out today. And let's see. And so first of all, thank you so much to the Ignatian Solidarity Network for shepherding 2 decades of teach-ins for social justice. I'm really pleased to be part of the 20th annual Ignatian Teach-In, which is an initiative, as you all know, with roots in nonviolent resistance to the brutal civil war in El Salvador that cost the lives of 6 Jesuit priests, including Archbishop Romero and his 2 companions in 1989. And it is just such a distinct pleasure to be speaking with so many young people who are dedicated to just doing it. When you work on nonviolent resistance and people power movements, youth have a really special place in your heart. They're catalysts for change. They have energy, creativity, and the natural inclination to defy authority. And these are all really important qualities when you're trying to build mass movements to confront injustices, build power, and win rights and freedoms. Some of the most amazing organizers and activists I know, whether they're from the US immigrant rights movement, and I now know Nelson, yeah, the Chilean economic justice movement, or the Zimbabwean pro-democracy movement, they're all gutsy young people. So, let's see. How does this one work? So I also have to give a shout out to my fellow BC Eagles. Are there any in the room? Yeah. Very good. So I graduated from Boston College in 1999 with a degree in political science. And as you all know, service unto others is really part of the school's DNA. And you literally cannot cross the BC campus without being asked to make donations to at least 5 different student organizations, raising funds for some social justice activity. So it's amazing to be with the Eagles here and with the Boston College crowd. And you know, one thing you learn when you're a student at BC is that faith in action really means something. And kind of the Jesuit style of troublemaking stays with you really for a lifetime. So I'm grateful for that. And then there's the really profound name for this teach-in, rowing into the deep, where magis meets justice. When I think about rowing into the deep, what comes to mind is being willing to take action and help others to find their purpose in the face of fear and uncertainty. And actually, that's how Marshall Gans, who's one of the great organizers in this country and who marched alongside Cesar Chavez, Dolores Huerta, and Martin Luther King, that's how he defined leadership. And magis, that is super Ignatian. It means doing more, being more, and achieving more than you may have ever thought possible. That's powerful stuff for the times we're living in now. When you consider the challenges we face, growing economic inequality, resurgent authoritarianism, cataclysmic climate change, politics grounded in hate and exclusion, their solutions require leadership, strategic organizing, and solidarity across issues and geographies. And that is why this annual gathering is so important. When I think of achieving the unimaginable, I think of people power. People power, also known as civil resistance or nonviolent action, is a means of wielding power without the threat or use of violence. It's when unarmed people, often facing extreme violence and oppression, come together and fight back using nonviolent methods like demonstrations, strikes, boycotts, and other forms of civil disobedience and non-cooperation. Often they have achieved important victories. When you consider this country alone, the anti-slavery movement, women's suffrage, the US Civil Rights Movement, the United Farm Workers Movement, LGBTQI rights, jobs with justice, and the movement for Black lives, all of these major advances in human rights and human dignity were brought about by organized groups of people who rode into the deep, resisted, and persevered. Just to rewind a little bit, after my BC junior year abroad in Strasbourg, France, I decided that international affairs was my thing. So at the Fletcher School of Law and Diplomacy, I studied international security studies, international negotiation and conflict resolution, and human rights. So basically, war, peace, and justice. At that time, I attended a Boston film screening of A Force More Powerful, a documentary film about 6 highly consequential nonviolent struggles. The film highlighted how unarmed civilians stared down the British Empire in India, led by Mahatma Gandhi, how they confronted Nazis in Denmark, fought apartheid in South Africa, and removed dictators in Chile and Poland, and dismantled Jim Crow in the US through nonviolent struggle. That film was an amazing inspiration for me. It brought people power to life, and I determined to focus my academic career on studying the strategic dimensions of nonviolent resistance. In other words, how does David really beat Goliath without violence? So after finishing my PhD, I met a woman named Erica Chenoweth, a fellow political scientist and a domestic terrorism expert. Erica happens to be a numbers freak and a quantitative guru, and she was skeptical that anything nonviolent could be effective against the most formidable of opponents. And she wasn't the only one. Associated with nonviolent organizing, negotiating differences, building coalitions, and collective action reinforce democratic norms and behaviors, and they tend to produce more peaceful societies. Nonviolent civil resistance, then, is a functional alternative to violence with both short and long-term positive effects. It is a particularly powerful nonviolent channel for marginalized or oppressed people to challenge systems of power, whether they are exploitative corporations, dictatorships, or institutionalized racism, and to build more inclusive and just societies. And not surprisingly, Pope Francis has taken note of the power of nonviolent action. In his 2017 World Day of Peace address, which is called Nonviolence, a Style of Politics for Peace, which is really a clutch document that I hope and dream one day may form the basis of an encyclical on the same topic. In that document, Pope Francis noted that, quote, momentous change in the lives of people, nations, and states has come about by means of peaceful protest, using only the weapons of truth and justice. And indeed, the Catholic Church has played a pivotal role in some of the most momentous nonviolent struggles in history. You recall the Filipino religious sisters who confronted military forces in a kleptocratic Marcos dictatorship in prayerful resistance during the 1986 People Power movement there. Across the Philippines, priests and nuns train their communities in nonviolence and nonviolent action. Cardinal Jamie Sin attended one of those workshops, and he later joined the Catholic Bishops' Conference of the Philippines in calling for a nonviolent struggle for justice, using Radio Veritas to amplify the message. This preparation, combined with an election monitoring mission led by local religious leaders, paved the way to Marcos's nonviolent ouster. And today, Filipino religious sisters and priests and congregants are using nonviolent resistance in the face of yet another violent dictator, Rodrigo Duterte. And I wish them well in their struggle. During the Polish Solidarity movement in the 1980s, Pope John Paul II, together with local priests and nuns, famously stood shoulder to shoulder with the worker-led movement that challenged communist tyranny with nonviolent resistance. Archbishop Oscar Romero of El Salvador was martyred for showing solidarity with campesinos and other victims of junta brutality. In the US, feisty women religious, including Sister Simone and Sister Pat. These feisty women have taken to the buses and to the streets to give voice to the poor and to the undocumented. Some of them have animated Laudato Si through direct action to protect the environment. You know, I'm often asked the question, well, what about the really, really hard cases? What about cases of genocide or ethnic cleansing or violent extremism? What about protecting innocent people? What are the nonviolent options in these situations? First, I should say that I don't come at this topic from a pacifist perspective. I'm also the first to admit that nonviolent action has not always worked. It's not always succeeded. At the same time, it's really interesting to note that nonviolent protests and other forms of collective action have won tactical concessions from extremist groups like ISIS in Iraq and Syria. And a little Sojourner shout out if anyone from Sojourners is in the room. Thank you. And Al-Shabaab in East Africa. For example, women's-led protests outside an ISIS headquarters, this is the Islamic State, in Raqqa, Syria, led to the release of political prisoners in 2014. And 2 years ago, in northeastern Kenya, fighters from the Al-Shabaab terrorist group ambushed a bus filled with Christians and Muslims. In the past, this had been a precursor to mass slaughter of the Christians when they separated into religious groups. In this case, the busload of unarmed civilians fought back using very interesting weapons. The Muslim women put hijabs on the heads of the Christian women to protect them. When the men were asked to get off the bus, they refused. They refused to separate according to their religious identities. And amazingly, the collective stubbornness of this group led to all the people on the bus surviving except for one. It's one incident, but it demonstrates the power of nonviolent resistance even in these difficult cases. I would also flag one really interesting nonviolent option even in these really difficult situations. Some of you may have heard of unarmed civilian protection, which is the use of unarmed civilians to do peacekeeping. This has helped deter violence and human rights abuses in conflict zones coming from state actors, militias, drug lords, and the like. A very interesting nonviolent option. Nonviolent Peace Force, Christian Peacemakers Teams, Peace Brigades International, and Operation Dove have led civilian peacekeeping missions in South Sudan, Sri Lanka, Colombia, Guatemala, the Philippines, Indonesia, Israel, Palestine, and elsewhere. And evaluations of this technique reveal that unarmed peacekeeping has saved lives, changed the behavior of armed groups, and made local peace and human rights work more possible. And of course, it goes without saying that if you want to prevent atrocities, you prevent war. Prevention demands investment. And right now, the levels of US and global investment in violence prevention are really tiny compared to the sums dedicated to war fighting. And this is perhaps an issue that you can raise with your members of Congress tomorrow. So far, I've focused a great deal on nonviolent resistance because this is what I know the best. But we know that this is one set of tools in a much broader nonviolent toolkit. Transforming violent conflict and dissolving its root causes requires a combination of people power and peace building. That means linking nonviolent resistance, which intentionally escalates conflict, together with traditional peace-building tools like negotiation, dialogue, and mediation, which de-escalate it. Martin Luther King Jr. understood this dynamic extremely well. As he so eloquently wrote in his letter from a Birmingham jail in 1963, "You may well ask why direct action, why the sit-ins, marches, and so forth. Isn't negotiation a better path? You are quite right," he said, in calling for negotiation. "Indeed, this is the very purpose of direct action. Nonviolent direct action seeks to create such a crisis and foster such a tension that a community which has constantly refused to negotiate is forced to confront the issue. It seeks to so dramatize the issue that it can no longer be ignored." It's one of the most amazing speeches I think that one can read. So, one group of women who are acutely aware of power dynamics and how to combine protest and peace building are women. Shout out to the women. Multiple studies have found that women's inclusion in peace processes correlates significantly with their success, with Northern Ireland and Liberia, which is featured here, are the most classic examples. And I would note that in this case, Liberian women organized to put an end to the civil war in that country. And do you know what their most famous tactic was? Sex boycotts. Just worth thinking about. But anyway, as we all know, certainly in this room, women bring unique identities, perspectives, and a sense of urgency to peace processes. While women often need to fight for a place at the table, it stands to reason that unlocking the leadership potential of women at all levels of an organization or institution, including the Catholic Church, would strengthen its ability to forge peace. Another nonviolent tool, dialogue and mediation, has helped resolve some of the most intractable violent conflicts, including the wars in El Salvador, Guatemala, Northern Ireland, and Colombia. The Catholic Church, often in partnership with other faith groups, has often been a key mediator. You all probably know the critical role that Pope Francis played recently in ending over 30 years of Colombia's civil war. And also, this is an interesting example for folks who study conflict and conflict resolution. The San Egidio group. Some may be familiar with this Catholic lay community of San Egidio, which is a Rome-based organization with some serious mediation skills and a biblical commitment to service, compassion, and peace, which played a critical role in ending the devastating Mozambique civil war in 1992. Faith groups have historically contributed in significant ways to transitional justice and reconciliation. In Guatemala, the Catholic Church helped initiate, organize, and execute the successful National Truth Commission, the Recovery of Historical Memory Project in the mid-90s. In Chile, the Catholic Church advocated for the country's Commission on Truth and Reconciliation following Pinochet's removal from power in 1990, which was a core component of that country's transition to democracy. The Chilean Commission, incidentally, helped inspire the South African Truth and Reconciliation Commission, which was shepherded by Bishop Tutu, as we all know. Now, since I'm getting to the near the end of my remarks, let me offer a bit of practical ideas about how the Catholic Church and its committed social justice foot soldiers, as you all are, can help make the Church an even stronger global leader in advocating for just peace. I'll just propose 3 ideas. First, consider joining the Catholic Nonviolence Initiative. CNI is a project of Pax Christi International and is committed to affirming the centrality of nonviolence and nonviolent action to the life and work of the Church at all levels. The initiative grew out of last year's Vatican co-sponsored conference in Rome on nonviolence and just peace, which I was honored to attend, and which was attended by theologians, activists, peace builders from conflict zones around the world. You all are the perfect group to help CNI find energetic, creative expression in Catholic schools, colleges, and universities around the world. It would be an amazingly powerful thing if only 8 to 10 schools came together and organized a global teach-in on what it means practically to build just peace. Second, and related to the first, imagine your Catholic schools and universities as just peace laboratories that can educate and train young people and communities in the full menu of nonviolent options and their practical strategic application. That includes training and skills building in nonviolent direct action, dialogue and peace building, and advocacy that leads to legal and policy change. There are lots of training resources available, developed by different organizations, with my organization, the U.S. Institute of Peace, being one of them, but there are many resources available in many different languages. I think it's especially important, especially in the polarized society and world that we're living in today, to emphasize the relationship between dialogue and direct action, the dialogical and the direct action approaches, between nonviolent escalation and de-escalation, and about how to channel the pressure and energy of the streets into concrete policy change. Third, consider using advocacy opportunities, like what you all will be doing on Capitol Hill tomorrow, to amplify the voices of courageous nonviolent activists and peace builders from the US and from around the world. People in general are moved by stories, and there are so many stories of nonviolent heroes and sheroes that need to be told. Activists and human rights defenders, Activists and human rights defenders need to know that people on the outside are watching and standing with them in solidarity, and don't underestimate the power of solidarity. Center their voices. And I would also, as long as I have the opportunity as a former State Department person here, which is maybe a strange voice in this crowd, but as long as I was a former US government official, one thing I would just note is that there's a desperate need for young people committed to social justice to enter public service and government. It's not everyone's calling. It's definitely not everyone's calling, but we all know that to bring change, you need people on the inside and you need people on the outside, and you need an inside-outside strategy. So I would encourage you to consider a career in public service. Now let me end with some wise words from a wise woman, and some of you may have seen this quote many times, and I'll offer this up for my mom, who's a particular fan of Dorothy Day. People say, what is the sense of our small effort? They cannot see that we must lay one brick at a time, take one step at a time. A pebble cast into a pond causes ripples that spread in all directions. Each one of our thoughts, our words, and deeds is like that. No one has a right to sit down and feel hopeless. There is too much work to do. So I would like to wish all of you, from the bottom of my heart, the very best as you continue to fight the good fights and work towards a more just and peaceful world. Thank you very much.